All right. Well, let's jump back into our study. God willing, this will be our conclusion to our the Age to Come study we've been doing. But let's review, and this review will cover just about, a few snippets of each stage of our study. So we'll go through this together. If you know it, shout it out. If you think you know it, shout it out. So number one, this is from our first phase of our study about what happens after we die. So before Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, all people went to blank after death. You remember?
An S.
Starts with an S. What is it? Sheol. Very good. So that's S-H-E-O-L. S-H-E-O-L. Now that's the Hebrew version. Do you remember the Greek version of that? That you would have in your New Testament if they translated it that way?
Is it hell?
Hades, actually. Hades. Yeah. Now the translation, a lot of English translations say hell, which I think is unfortunate, but yeah, it's kind of the equivalent to hell. It's distinct enough, I think, from what we usually think of hell that it's worth noting. But this is just the place of the dead. Now remember, the righteous and the unrighteous went there. There was a distinction of their situation, and that was illustrated in Jesus' story of Lazarus and the rich man, if you remember that in Luke. Lazarus, the poor guy, he went to be with Abraham in the better part of Sheol. Some people would call it paradise. The rich man went to this place of suffering in Sheol. So they're both in Sheol, but in a different situation. So that was before Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. Something shifted after Jesus died, was buried, went to Sheol, and was resurrected. So, since Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, the righteous go to blank. Where do the righteous go now?
Heaven.
Heaven itself, that's right. God's presence. Something did change after Jesus' resurrection. For the righteous ones. After death, the righteous go to heaven. The wicked go to... They'd still be going to Sheol. So, same as before for the wicked. They're still waiting for the ultimate judgment. Now, the reason I hesitate to say hell about that is when you read Revelation, you find you go from this holding place called Sheol to your eternal destination, which for the wicked would be that fiery lake of burning sulfur, the second death. That's, I think, what most people have in mind for hell. But, what we know as Sheol is still a terrible place to be for the unrighteous too. So, anyway, so that's the picture of after death for now, before the resurrection of the dead. Okay, number 3. What do you expect to see and hear at Jesus' return? Now, there's a lot of things you can say here, so just throw out anything you can think of. What do you expect?
It depends on what your situation is.
Okay, so you as a believer.
As a believer,
Yeah.
I think I'm going to be instantly in His presence.
Okay.
I mean, twinkling of an eye, bang, you're there.
Yeah.
If you're unsaved, you're going to be wondering what's going on here.
Yeah, where did everybody go?
Well, one of the things we read or studied is that for the unbeliever, there's agony. There's this mourning, wailing.
Wailing.
Just at the sight of him, it's almost like you just realized, it's like a Nazi seeing the American tank roll in. Oh man, this. So that's one thing you expect. Anything else? You remember the description?
Trumpets.
The trumpet blast, right? The last trumpet.
Clouds.
Clouds. He'll come in the clouds, right?
Gathering of angels.
Oh, the angels. Oh, they're going to flood the skies. And remember, that's a military scene. That's an invasion force. That's going to be tremendous to see. It's going to be unbelievable. And they're going to have a job to do, remember. They're not just eye candy. They're going to be separating the righteous from the wicked, removing the wicked. They're going to be gathering up the righteous. Anything else?
Let me ask a question along that line. And I've kind of always wondered about this. Those who are not saved, are they going to physically see Him?
Yeah. Because there's a few places, but especially in Revelation, it says every eye will see him,
Yeah.
and the nations will mourn because of him. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think, like we've been saying, for certain people it will be a terrifying thing. Because, again, not just Jesus in his glory, but he's coming in the angels' glory. That's going to be scary, and hello, my love. Remember, fire is going to be involved. He said he's coming in blazing fire, Paul wrote. So that'll be pretty freaky for if you don't have him as a friend. Scott, could you pass down that sheet next to you for Christina? So there's two voices we expect to hear. We expect to hear the voice of the archangel, and also we expect to hear the loud command. Now, Jesus said he will command the dead and they will rise. So we expect to hear Jesus' loud command for the dead to rise. So a lot of things we're expecting to see and hear. Remember, no matter where you are on planet Earth, you will know it's happening. Okay? Because, well, we're getting to that number 4. When Jesus returns, will it be secretive or obvious?
All will know.
Yeah, it'll be obvious. Now, the reason I point this out is there's a popular teaching about a secretive coming of Jesus and the snatching away of the saints, and everyone's like, wait, what happened? But remember, what he said is never take anyone's word for it that, oh, he's over there, or he's over there in the cave or in the desert. He said, don't listen to them. When it happens, it's like lightning. Even if it happens over there, you'll see it over there. Don't worry. You're going to know it happened. And we're going
Did you read any of the Left Behind books?
I didn't.
The reason I bring that up is because when this happens, one of the main characters is an airline pilot, and he's left behind.
Right.
But a lot of the people on his airplane, there are two groups, those who are all of a sudden gone, and you see obvious results of things they left behind, and there are those who are left behind. But the gist of it is that they're all wondering what's going on.
Exactly, and that's what I'm talking about. It's actually probably the predominant view of that in America, partly because of those books. Really spread it. And as we're going to see in question number 6, there's certain language in the Bible that leads people to think that, but I don't think it's supported. So it will be obvious. And number 5, oh, by the way, that reminds me, have you seen the bumper stickers? They're not as popular now. Did you ever see those bumper stickers that said, in case of rapture, car will be unmanned, or something like that? Or something. Again, it's an interesting thought, but no one will be wondering. No one will wonder, where'd that driver go? I mean, no, it's because, Jesus came. So, anyway, number 5, who knows the specific timing of Jesus' return?
Only him.
Well, he said specifically what?
The Father.
The Father, yeah. Remember, at least at the time Jesus said it, he said the Son doesn't know, the angels don't even know. And the thing that's interesting, he said the angels don't know. You're like, why did he say that? Well, in the Old Testament, there's this picture that God has a heavenly council, and he shares his counsel with the angels, and there's actually a time where he's asking kind of for input from the angels. And so Jesus, to these Jews, is making it clear to them, he's holding his cards close to his chest even from his heavenly counsel. They don't even know, Now, it's possible, since Jesus went back to be with Father, maybe Father let Jesus in on it since then. But at least at the time Jesus said it, only the Father knew. So that's pretty important. We're not going to figure it out. The guy on TV, by the way, was not going to figure it out. Father knows. Number 6. And this is, again, returning to the idea of the secretive. In what way will Jesus' return be like a thief?
In the night.
Yeah, like a thief in the night. But in what way does his return, how is it compared to being like a thief in the night?
Nobody knows he's coming.
That's what it is. See, the timing of it is like a thief. Unexpected, unannounced. When it happens, it won't be like, you might picture a thief where no one knew it happened until they woke up the next morning. That's not the comparison. The comparison is, it's not going to be announced ahead of time so everyone can be ready. If you're not ready, you're not ready, when it hits. So that's an important thing to keep in mind as you read, because the like a thief language is where most of that secretive return gets its traction. Well, he said like a thief. In fact, I watched a movie in the Christian school I attended in elementary school called Like a Thief in the Night. And it was, of course, that secretive rapture kind of movie. So I grew up with that And it wasn't until I studied further and heard other viewpoints that I realized, well, there's something wrong with that. Anywho, number 7. What must happen to the first creation before the new creation comes about?
Must be judged.
Good. And what will God do to it in that judgment?
Burn it up and destroy it.
Burn it up and destroy it. That's right. In the language of the Hebrew writer, it was the shaking, the final shaking. Peter describes it as that, the fire that consumes everything. The elements melt in the heat. So I think that's actually on the pages here. That part of our study is on page 12. Yeah. So if you wanted to get any of those scriptures of that section, that's on page 12 of the final shaking. But yeah, he's not. Now remember, he's not like putting in the garbage. He's refining and purifying what is so that he can remake it. The word new in that the Greek language isn't new in time. It's new in fashion. So you could almost picture it like the fire is God going to burn away the impurities so he can remake it with what he has. It's kind of an interesting thought. And then number 8, according to Isaiah's vision of the new heaven and new earth in Isaiah 65, how will life in the new creation be different than life in the current creation? We looked at this a couple of weeks ago. So if you can't remember, that's okay. But anything you remember from Isaiah 65 that are clearly different in the new creation from this one?
Even the animals get along.
Yeah, right? No carnivorous attacking of each other. They're eating straw together. They're hanging out together. The animals that would usually be attacking. That's such a cool detail of what we can expect. Anything else?
No
At
death.
night.
Death. Now, in Isaiah 65, it talked about death as being put off, which brought up the question: does that mean that he's talking about there will be death? No. What he was saying was if anyone dies before they reach 100 years old, they'll be considered kids. And he said anyone who dies at 100 will be called accursed. So you're like, what does that mean? Are people dying? And my conclusion is no. I think he's using poetic comparisons to say, if 100 years is young, guess what? And in fact, he says, my people will live as long as trees. So I don't think that means he's saying we're going to die. He's just saying death is not an issue, guys. You won't. And he also talked about there won't be death for children, no premature death for kids. And for most of us, that probably means a lot, Most people have experienced that. So that's one big difference. Death is just not an issue. We don't have to deal with death. Any other?
There won't be any night.
That's actually from Revelation.
Okay.
Yeah, but you keep that one in mind. Good. Anything else? What do you say about Jerusalem? Do you remember? In the new creation.
You mean the size?
No, that was Revelation 2. What did he say about, I will make Jerusalem what?
In a row.
This is in number 10, by the way. I guess I'm getting ahead of myself. But he said that Jerusalem will be a delight and its people a joy. And why does that matter? Why does he bring up Jerusalem? Well, again, this is the capital city of his kingdom on earth. And you think about how capital cities on earth go, like Washington, D.C., and the people in it. And that's amazing that he's going to be able to transform this world so much that the center of power will be joyous and good. That says a lot, That's a pretty huge thing. That's going to be different. The whole political, I think there will still be power and authority there, but the whole political scene will be so different. It won't be like eye-rolling and gross. It'll be like, wow, they're awesome over there. Anyway.
Ryan, one of the lessons that I don't remember whether we had a chance to do it as a result of Christmas or not, but in one of those lessons from Revelation, it talks about, and I think I'm reaching down to try and pull this out. It talks about the kings of the world
Yeah.
coming into Jerusalem. And it was evidently in one of those lessons that we didn't get to do because I'm still puzzled over that. What's happening there?
Yeah, that was our last study. We went through that Revelation 21 picture. And basically what I think that indicates, and actually that we're going to be touching on the implications of that today. What that indicates, I think, and Jesus' parables bear this out too, he will assign certain trustworthy servants of his to have leadership in his new world. And people are outside of the kingdom. That's pretty clear from Revelation 21.
People outside of Jerusalem.
Outside of Jerusalem, the capital city.
Okay.
I do believe will be all over this earth when it's new. There's indications, actually, kind of like the priesthood in the Old Testament, will all be serving in that city at different part, like maybe by the lot system like they had. But anyways, those outside the city will be living in their different areas. They'll have leaders over their areas. Now, this is not like a whole chapter describing this. This is just kind of piecing it together. But I think there will be kings, so to speak, leaders of different realms on earth that will come to honor the high king. And what it says is they bring their splendor into it. I think that means they're bringing the best of their region. You know, they've got their artisans making stuff. They've got whatever, and they're bringing it to the high king to show him their honor. And so I think that image is pretty consistent. That there's a kingdom, you know, and it's not egalitarian where we're all just equal buds hanging out. There's actually a leadership structure he'll have. And in fact, the language in Revelation that's consistent also in Timothy, and Jesus spoke of it, that his people will reign with him in eternity. It's still not totally clear, but, you have people who ask, well, reign over what? If we're all reigning, who are reigning over, But I think there's actually going to be hierarchy is a bad word because of how we've done it. But I think there will be a good, pleasing, and satisfying hierarchy. And what we're going to study today is, I think, going to show us what Jesus will base that on. But anyway, yeah, that's such a fascinating detail John gives and does not go into any further explanation. So we're kind of left to figure out what that might mean. So back to number 9 now. With the differences in the new creation, what did we see in Isaiah 65? And by the way, the review of Isaiah 65 is on page 13, in case you wanted to skim over that while we're talking about it. What are some of the similar things he describes in the new creation to what we know here on this earth, the old earth? Anything going to be similar?
Well, it says here there will be work, but it won't be in vain.
Yeah. That's one of the coolest details of the new creation I have found out, that we are not going to just sit around and sing all the time. We're not just playing harps forever. We actually are productive. We're building things. We're growing things. Like I said, I think there's going to be artisans and crafts of different kinds that we get to create things for the king. Absolutely. And one of the reasons I think that's so cool is that is very consistent with the way God made us as human beings from the very beginning. We aren't productive and creative because we sinned, right? From the very beginning, God said, do some work, take care of my garden. And we didn't become creative when we sinned. We didn't become artistic when we sinned. That was all built into us originally. I think in the new creation, we're going to be able to express that forever. We're going to become so good at all this stuff. Anyway.
That's what I want to become an artist.
Yeah, there you go. And again, think about that.
I'm not an artist, but my dream is to become an artist.
You'll have all the time there is to just hone those skills. And again, think about that. If you took however long you took, knowing that a delegation is going to go to the capital city, to the king, and they're going to take your piece with them to give to him. Oh my gosh. Anyway. So yeah, there will be relationships too. Now, the relationships aren't going to end because of death. We're not going to have to worry about our children like it says. The relationships will be different and better, but they're there. Remember, this isn't a solo eternity with Jesus and me. This is all of us, the big family.
Yes, but will we individually be able to go up and talk to him?
I absolutely think so.
That's always been, like, when I get to heaven, I want him to walk up to me and give me a hug and say welcome. That's my dream.
I absolutely think so. Yeah.
That's what I'm working for.
Yeah. And because we love him so much, yeah. And he loves us. I think that's why I'm convinced he will do that. He's not going to stay hidden away in his, behind. And remember, John said there's no temple in the New Jerusalem. So there's no sense of he's locked behind those doors and only certain people can access him. He's there for us. Oh, it's going to be great. Now, we already did number 10, so we'll let that be. In the new creation, Jerusalem will be a joy, or a delight, and its people a joy. Okay, now, we're going to end our study on what I think is the most practical element of all that we've talked about. And if there's no practical payoff, it's all just kind of academic. So, to me, this is such an important part of what we're looking at. Let me just preface this by saying what we're about to study, and it's almost entirely from Jesus' teachings. What we're about to study has made one of the most significant differences in my own view of my life, day-to-day practical life, out of all the things I've learned from Jesus. Because this is creating for me the vision, the backdrop that explains what he's told me to do. One of the things that happened in my life with Jesus is early on I had a lot of the puzzle pieces. I became well known for how much I knew of the Bible even as a teenager. Adults were coming to me because I knew a lot of stuff, and I was very proud of that, by the way. I was very egotistical about that. But anyways, I had all the puzzle pieces. What I didn't know at that time was that they weren't all put together. If somebody asked me a question, I'd rummage around in my puzzle box, and that piece probably helps you. There you go. And I didn't have the whole picture. And until I went and received training at the school I attended and had some people help me with that, it was just that. But all of a sudden, I was able to put, the meat on a skeleton. I was able to put the flesh on a skeleton. I saw the whole a lot clearer. This is one of those elements that brought a lot of the pieces of the puzzle of Jesus' commands and why we're supposed to do this and that. And it became clear to me, oh, that's how it fits. That's what all this has to do with anything. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to connect the daily life we live today to that eternal future we've been looking at. And it's all going to tie back to what Scott brought up, which is, what's the deal with there being people in charge? What's that all about? If we're not all equal, egalitarian in that new world, what's that all based on? So, there's few enough passages that, rather than assigning readings, we'll just all turn to them, because there's not that many. So let's begin in Matthew 24. And I'm sure this is familiar to some or all of us, this parable. I grew up hearing it as the parable of the talents, but the newer translations have said it differently just so it's clearer to people. In the updated NIV, they call it bags of gold, which is clearer to the English speaker. Because what's the problem with referring to these things as talents? We think of talents as something else. So we think of the ability to sing or play an instrument or, whatever, art. So it actually was quite confusing to a lot of people when they used the more literal rendering of talent, which is an actual kind of money. So I'm okay with the fact they changed it to bag of gold, just because I think for the average reader that probably gives them a better picture of what we're talking about anyway. Anyone else have a different translation that has a different way to refer to the money here? You see it in verse 15. Is there a different way to refer to it in your Bible? Say of talents, bags of gold, any other? Okay. Well, just so you know, if you ever read this and it says talents, it's money, right? It's a chunk of money. Okay. Well, if is someone willing to read for us? It's a lengthy reading, but we want to take it all in. This is verses 14 to 30.
Of what?
In Matthew... Oh, I'm in the wrong one. Sorry. I'm ahead of myself again. Okay, we're in Matthew 24, verses probably 45 better, 45 to 47. Anyone willing to read that shorter passage?
Sure.
Thank you.
Who then is the faithful and wise servant, whom the master has put in charge of the servants in his household to give them their food at the proper time? It will be good for that servant whose master finds him doing so when he returns. I tell you the truth, he will put him in charge of all his possessions.
Now, this is a very common theme for Jesus' parables. A master's gone away. leaves servants in charge, and when he gets back, he evaluates the performance and then takes them to the next stage of their service based on that performance. In this case, notice what he says. While he's away, he puts a servant in charge of taking care of his other servants. And if he comes back and his servant did a good job, what did he say the payoff is for that servant?
Is rewarded. That's all mine said.
Charge for.
What about in charge of what?
Responsibility.
Yeah. So you were faithful with this amount of work I gave you to do. You did a good job. You proved yourself. Here, I'm going to kick it up a notch in the next phase of your service to me. Now notice in the parable, it's after he comes back. And that's the connection we're going to be seeing over and over again. After he comes back, he evaluates what you did in his absence. And based on that performance, he says, oh, well, I can surely trust you with this much now, right? So keep that in mind. Now, what we didn't read is the negative side of that. What happens if the servant didn't do a good job? The punchline is in verse 51. He'll cut him to pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Oh my goodness. So if you do well for the master, what he wanted you to do, amazing payoff. Like a generous payoff. It's not a one-to-one payoff. It's like hugely generous. On the other side of it, if you fail the master, there's a terrible consequence too. Now let's go to Luke 12:40. Well, actually, that's about the exact wording. It's just copied by Luke, so I guess we don't have to read that. It's almost word for word what Matthew had. But let's turn to Matthew 25, since you're one chapter in front of that. And this is what I was thinking before. In Matthew 25, starting in verse 14, we have this parable of the bags of gold or talents or something. Is anyone willing to read this longer section here? 14 to 30?
I'll do it.
Okay.
Again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents of money, to another 2 talents, to another 1 talent, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. The man who had received the 5 talents went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 more. So also the one who had with the 2 talents gained 2 more. But the man who had received the 1 talent went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received the 5 talents brought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 talents. See, I have gained 5 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. The man with 2 talents also came. Master, he said, you have entrusted me with 2 talents. See, I have gained 2 more. The master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. As far as we're going.
All the way to 30, please.
Where are we going to?
30, verse 30.
Clear down to the end of that section.
Yeah.
Then the man who had received the 1 talent came. Master, he said, I knew you were a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your talent in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. His master replied, you wicked, lazy servant, so you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. Well then, you should have put my money in deposit with the bankers, so that when I return, I would have received it back with interest. Take the talent from him and give it to the one who has the 10 talents. For everyone who has will be given more, and he will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken from him. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth.
Ooh, so this is like an expanded version of what we just read earlier in Matthew 24. Matthew 24 was the really short version. This is the more detailed version of that same scenario. Now, I think most of us love this passage because of verse 21 and verse 23, where the master responds with those beautiful words, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a little. I will put you in charge of much. Come share in your master's happiness. Like, I think all of us just want to hear that from our master. wonderful. But remember, that's only true of some of the servants. It's not an automatic, just because you're his servant, you get that response. Remember, it's based on the actual work and performance that the servant did. Now, just for context or perspective, do you have a footnote at the bottom of your Bible page that tells you how much a talent is, or a bag of gold?
$1,000.
What is it?
$1,000 it says here.
All right, so,
Mine says 20 years worth of wages for a day laborer.
yeah, which that tells you they didn't make much. That's $1,000. But this is no small thing that's entrusted to these servants. This is a good chunk. I mean, $5,000 at that time is a huge amount of money.
Is that what they would have made? Or when he says a day laborer, is that like even lower than a servant in someone's household?
It probably depends on whose household it is. But we're talking about, yeah, like someone who is hired for the day to work in the fields, which is
So maybe to the servants it would have been not worth less, but like for a day laborer that would have been so much money.
yeah, a fortune.
But for a servant, would that, in their viewpoint, would that have been less than what it sounds like?
Yeah, it's hard to know without knowing the person's situation. But obviously this is a wealthy master.
Well,
Right.
mine says a talent is equal to 75 pounds or 34 kilograms. I mean,
Of gold.
75 pounds that's a
That's
lot
a
of money.
lot.
Yeah,
That's just one.
yeah.
He had 5 of those. Wow.
So whatever the case, these people have been entrusted with much. It's not theirs, remember? And that's the whole point of it. It's not theirs. And they're servants to the master, which means they owe him service. They owe him work. Now, the whole reason he gives it to them is because he's a productive guy. Obviously, he's doing well for himself because he's productive. And he says, I can't do the work while I'm here. You need to do it for me because I have to leave. So keep all this in context in view of what the whole thing Jesus said, again it will be like, in verse 14. What will be like? The whole thing is his discussion of the destruction of Jerusalem and the end of the age, his return. It will be like, my coming back will be like this scenario. So he's obviously the master. That's not hard to figure out. Who are the servants? Well, anyone who claims him as Lord. Notice here, he doesn't give the same amount, but he gives something to his servants.
It's like everybody gets a gift.
Everyone gets whatever they're given.
Gift. Yeah.
And it's based on their ability. He says here in Luke, I can't remember what does it say? Yeah, here in verse 15, each according to his ability. So here's why this is such a game changer when we actually absorb the implications of this. There is the after effect of his pronouncement. The well done, come and share your master's happiness means something after that moment. It's not just let's go have a party and then everything else is reset. Something happens after this well done, come and share in my master's happiness. And we're going to read the Luke version of the story and you'll get a better sense of it. And what this means is whatever you've been entrusted by the Lord with is actually his. It's his estate. It's his property. It's his whatever it is. His spiritual gift. It's his relationship that he's given you. What this is implying pretty clearly is that we actually owe him returns on his fill in the blank.
Investment in us.
Yeah. Now, is that money? Yeah. Is that spiritual gifting? Sure. Is that time? Absolutely. And that's the thing. A lot of times when we hear or read this, we try to focus it onto one of those things. It's the whole picture. That's why it changed my vision of life so dramatically. Because I grew up in the American consumeristic culture in which money, you have to make money to pay your bills. But why do you really want to make money? Because they're showing you all the stuff you can have. That's why. I mean, what do you do when you have an extra chunk of money? Well, in this world, you figure out what you want to buy. And you just go buy it. Or you just put on your credit card or something. And I grew up in a world that trained me thoroughly to see my time as, well, do what you got to do to get by. But then there's me time. And you spend the money on what you got to spend it on, but then there's me money. And there's always looking for the me section of whatever I was given. And I was always given permission by this world to do what I wanted with it as long as it was legal, and didn't hurt anybody. But And just as an example, for time, I would do my schoolwork when I was younger, and I would do my homework, and I did well in all of it. I'd go to the church when I was supposed to go to the church. I put in all my time. And then, for me time, which was a lot of it, I would play video games. Hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, because I had nothing I had to do. So it was my time. Nothing wrong with it. Wouldn't hurt anybody. Sure. But the problem is, I was not given that to enjoy. Totally. I mean, yes, we're allowed to enjoy things, but that's not the whole purpose for him giving me that time. Apparently, he actually gave it to me expecting something out of it for his purposes. His estate is supposed to grow. Think on that with money, too. I've made a lot of mistakes like this in our past, and we're still paying off some of that. But when we have extra money from, let's say it's a tax return, it's a bonus from work, something, we've covered the bills, we've got everything that we have to get covered, and now it's just free money. What a phrase that is, right? Honestly, the way I was trained, my brain, earlier in my training under Jesus, was naturally drawn to what toys or goodies or fun. And it's not always objects, sometimes it's experiences, sometimes it's vacations. Well, then you start to go face to face with Jesus' teachings, and you realize that is the exact opposite of the calling on my life. Because if I truly see my master has entrusted me with his estate, my primary thought is, so what does he want done? Right? I mean, that's obviously, with this money, it wasn't, here's some bags of money, go have yourself a good old time on me. That's not what it was. It was, make sure when I get back, I have more to show for it than when I left, Now, this, let's go to the Luke version of this, because he actually gives us a little bit more detail of the after part of it than Matthew's did. And I want you to pay close attention to what the king in this story, not just a master, what the king offers to his faithful servants because they were faithful. And this is in Luke 19, starting in verse 11. And here it's called minas instead of talents. It's still a significant chunk of money. Similar storyline, but just notice the differences between Matthew's and this version. Is anyone willing to read this parable? Again, it's a bit lengthy, 11 through 27.
Hello.
Good, thank you.
Nobody else wants to. 27, you said? Through 27?
Yeah.
While they were listening to this, he went on to tell them a parable, because he was near Jerusalem, and the people thought that the kingdom of God was going to appear at once. He said, "A man of noble birth went to a distant country to have himself appointed king and then to return. So he called 10 of his servants and gave them 10 minas. 'Put this money to work,' he said, 'until I come back.' But his subjects hated him and sent a delegation after him to say, 'We don't want this man to be our king.' He was made king, however, and returned home. Then he sent for the servants to whom he had given the money in order to find out what they had gained with it. The first one came and said, 'Sir, your mina has earned 10 more.' 'Well done, my good servant,' his master replied. 'Because you have been trustworthy in a very small matter, take charge of 10 cities.' The second came and said, 'Sir, your mina has earned 5 more.' His master answered, 'You take charge of 5 cities.' Then another servant came and said, 'Sir, here is your mina. I have kept it laid away in a piece of cloth. I was afraid of you because you're a hard man. You take out what you did not put in and reap what you did not sow.' His master replied, 'I will judge you by your own words, you wicked servant. You knew, did you, that I am a hard man, taking out what I did not put in and reaping what I did not sow? Why then didn't you put my money on deposit, so that when I came back I could have collected it with interest?' Then he said to those standing by, 'Take his mina away from him and give it to the one who has 10 minas.' 'Sir,' they said, 'he already has 10. He replied, 'I tell you that to everyone who has, more will be given, but as for the one who has nothing, even what they have will be taken away. But those enemies of mine who did not want me to be king over them, bring them here and kill them in front of me.'"
Hello. Now, one of the layers of the story he adds here that he didn't have in Matthew is this whole king thing. And remember, he mentions there's a delegation that says, "We don't want him as our king," and too bad, he's king anyway. Now, what do you think that refers to?
That's awesome.
Those that don't accept Jesus as their Lord and Savior.
Now, specifically in his storyline, who would have been the delegation telling the kingmakers we don't want him? Well, it would have been the religious leaders. They so much did not want him to be king, they killed him, right? That's pretty clear message to God. We don't want him our Messiah. No, I love the line, they made him king anyway. God made Jesus king, Messiah anyway. It's, you can complain all you want. The fact is the fact. So that's a layer he adds to the story. But the other layer of the story is his interaction with the servants. Notice, though, here it's not just, well done, I'll put you in charge of more, come and share my happiness. There are specific responsibilities mentioned. To the one who had the 10 minas increase, what did he say? This is in verse 17.
That he would be in charge of 10 cities.
Whoa. Now, with parables, you got to be careful not to read too much into everything. But connecting this to what we were talking about before about the new earth and the regions and the kings and all that, just very possibly something to this. Because Jesus did go off. He was made king, so to speak. He's crowned king of the universe, all authority in heaven and on earth. He's at God's right hand as pretty much his co-ruler of everything. So he's made king. When he comes back and sees his servants and evaluates their work, I would not at all be surprised if he said, I have a whole world to rule. Go take charge of that section for me, or those sections for me. Now, what is he basing this determination on? The product, the result of their work while he was away. Do you see why this is a stunning reality that if we absorb it, this is a game changer? Because a lot of times the gospel that we've heard is the gospel of our salvation and our security in eternity, which is good. Like, never lose that. But when you leave out this part of the gospel story, what you have is a bunch of Christians waiting around. Waiting, and one author described it as people on the side of the road with their hood up waiting for AAA to arrive. Like, we're just kicking it, waiting, holding on. Just hold on. And life is hard, so just pray God makes it easier for you. And it's such a self-absorbed vision of salvation. This is a king-absorbed vision of salvation, where yes, you belong to the king. Yes, he's welcomed you into his kingdom, but this is focused on him. And since he's gone and he has a lot of work he wants done, it's only reasonable that his servants will actually do it. So I had to go through this huge transition in my own thinking. My vision of the gospel had to go from me making it into heaven to me serving the great king who's welcoming me into his kingdom. That's a big difference, really big. And this is not just for the pastors and the evangelists and the big names or the leaders. This is for every single person who calls him Lord. In fact, this is one thought that excites me. I think there are some people who do whatever job they do, but who are so faithful to use what God gave them for his purposes, they will be entrusted with more than a lot of pastors will be. Because sometimes you have pastor, you think you must be doing God's work because your name is, pastor something. And you can just kind of let things go. But see, it's the diligence to be focused on what Master wants, what Master desires, that he's going to reward. There's going to be a real payoff for people who were diligent. Now, here's a sobering thought. In fact, I didn't have it in here, but turn with me to 1 Corinthians chapter 3, I think it is. You might want to write this down when we find out what it actually is. Yeah, it is. It's 1 Corinthians 3. Look at verse 10 and following with me. It's 10 through 15, basically. Paul had this perspective too. And we don't need to talk about this only in terms of will you make it into heaven, but no, what will the result be when you're in the kingdom, when you're in the new creation? Let's say that you've been welcomed in by the king. That's not the only question. The question is, now what? Now, would somebody read 1 Corinthians 3, 10 to 15?
Because of God's grace to me, I've laid the foundation like an expert builder. Now others are building onto it. But whoever is building on this foundation must be very careful, For no one can lay any foundation other than the one we already have, Jesus Christ. Anyone who builds on that foundation may use a variety of materials: gold, silver, jewels, wood, hay, or straw. But on Judgment Day, fire will reveal what kind of work each builder has done. The fire will show if a person's work has any value. If the work survives, the builder will receive a reward. But if the work is burned up, the builder will suffer great loss. The builder will be saved, but like someone barely escaping through the walls of the flame.
What? So here he doesn't say, well, you're consigned to hell because you didn't do enough good work. This is not about working to have a place in the kingdom. That's not what we're saying. It's working to have a position there. And work matters. And I think it's interesting the way we, in the church generally, in order to avoid swinging to one extreme with the pendulum, we often swing the other way. And then we find out, oh no, we went too far, so then we start swinging it. So here's an example of what I mean. There was a long time where the works that we are supposed to do were emphasized very, very highly. And then it became too much the emphasis of what you do is all that matters, as if you could earn your salvation. So we're like, oh, that's not good, we can't do that. So then what do? Well, we went past the beautiful middle spot, and we went too far this way, which said, works aren't that big a deal after all. It's all faith. That's all that matters is your heart and whether you love God. And we just bypassed the truth and went way too far this way. So now works aren't that big a deal anyways. It's just kind of a cherry on top. Well, what's the actual middle truth? Grace is the foundation of everything. In fact, notice what Paul said there. Because of the grace given to me, I'm working. I'm laying a foundation. I'm building because of God's grace. It doesn't exclude God's grace. I wouldn't be able to do this if it weren't for His grace, right? So there's a beautiful middle place here, and I don't want to give any impression here that what we're talking about is earning your place in the kingdom, as if you could. It's ridiculous. But neither can we pretend that works are just a cherry on top. Doesn't really matter, but if you throw them in there, that's good. What Jesus is showing us in these parables is that He is intensely concerned with the effectiveness of our work. And He is not the one who's teaching us that it's okay, you're going to go to heaven, so just sit and hang on. He never taught that. His teaching is consistently, I'm the master, and I really want stuff to get done. And it's for you to do it, right? That's always been His message all the way through. And so that's why this is such an important look for us. To wrap up our look at the eternal future we have, this is going to affect our eternal future in real ways. Let's look at a few more passages and then we'll kind of try to tie it all together. Look at Luke 16, 9-12. And this is specifically about financial, but I think we can apply it to other things as well. Now, this is on the tail end of his parable about the shrewd manager. If you're not familiar with that, that's okay. But listen to his punchline to this thing. Let's read verses 9-12. If anyone's willing to read that.
I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own?
That is as clear as it gets. I love this statement. Notice two key things here. Number one, he says, if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, so that's one kind of wealth, who will trust you with, what do you say? What's the other kind? True riches. No, did you see that? That's huge. Jesus' perspective on this worldly stuff that we get so obsessed with is that it's not even real. Of course, it's real in the sense that we use it, but it's not even in the eternal scope of things. This is like Monopoly. It is just Monopoly money. And the thing is, I don't think it's a stretch to say what we're doing with earthly stuff is basically God's evaluation tool to say, so how will you handle my eternal things? How are you going to do with that? And it's not enough for us to say, well, don't worry, Lord, when I'm there, I'll do a good job. Like, why would you do it then if you didn't do it now? Did you not take my stuff seriously now? Did you not think I was serious about it in this mortal life? And this statement, this is one to take deep into your spirit. And then notice this one, verse 12. This is another game changer. Look, if you haven't been trustworthy with someone else's property, this goes right back to that parable, right? It's not even mine. And if you don't know how to take care of someone else's property, why would God give you something of your own? And think on this connection to our eternal future. Why does he say something of your own? Because remember, the future earth that we're going to be on is our inheritance. It will be given to us as ours. What we have now is not our inheritance. This is God's. He's got a program. He's got a mission. He's distributing it to his people to make sure they get it done. But this isn't ours. The ours is later. And didn't Jesus say this early on in his ministry? Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit, not be lent. It won't be lent to them. It'll be an inheritance given to them. What will they inherit?
The earth.
The whole earth. And he meant that. Like, the whole earth is going to belong to his people. That's when it's ours. Right now, we're trying to show him that we know what to do with it. And it's not even ours to do with it. Do you see why it's so, I think, absurd when we get that extra time or that extra money or that extra whatever, and our first thought is, how can I enjoy myself with it? When you see the truth for what it really is, that it just seems absurd. Now, in the moment, it seems perfectly rational because the world told me that's okay. But listening to my master, it's bizarre to think that way. It's just kind of a sick thing. Now, that let me just caution. That's not to say that enjoying anything is always wrong. In fact, let's look at 1 Timothy 6, a few verses here. And Paul acknowledges that God actually desires for us to enjoy things. He gives us things for our enjoyment. There is a perspective here of balance. But of course, the world invites us to forget the balance and just obsess about how much we can enjoy. Let's start in verse 17 and read to verse 19. And I'll read that. So it's 1 Timothy 6, 17 to 19. Excuse me. So this is Paul writing to Timothy. Now, Timothy is a leader in the church in Ephesus. This is why he tells him to command people. He has authority on Christ's behalf to do that. And he's kind of the representative of Paul the Apostle, so he has this authority. Command those who are rich in this present world. He's got the eternal perspective here, right? Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God. Notice this, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. And I think as you read Jesus' life, you can see him enjoying things. He's going to feasts, he's enjoying good wine, he eats the meat. In fact, he criticized his opponents because John the Baptist didn't seem to enjoy anything, and they thought he was crazy. And then Jesus comes enjoying things, and they say he's evil. So it's like, what do you guys want? You want a stoic, or do you want someone who enjoys things? Anyway. Verse 18, command the rich to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In this way they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age. There it is. So that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. Again, he's going to the truly thing. Jesus spoke of true riches. Paul's referring to true life. This perspective that what we're experiencing now is real, but it's only a shadow of the real thing coming, is something that if we have that vision firmly in place, I think we're going to experience the fuller life God has for us. Because, have you ever heard that phrase, that line, being so heavenly minded, you're no earthly good? Have you ever heard that? Heard that my whole life growing up. And it was a caution against, I don't know, having your nose in the Bible all day so you don't help anybody. I don't know what exactly they're warning against, but don't be so heavenly minded that you're no earthly good. But I have to tell you, the more I've studied the scriptures, the more I realize the more heavenly minded you are, or the more eternity minded you are, the more earthly good you do. Because when you're earthly minded, you learn the earth's lessons, which is make yourself happy. When you're eternity minded, you're like, oh my gosh, it's so much bigger than me. There's so much more involved here than just me. And I hope we've seen that through these parables. One more passage of scripture, and then we'll have some tie together. Let's go to Matthew 25 again. So I wanted to show you the way Jesus, again, through a story or through a picture, kind of tells us what Paul just did. How we use our earthly resources, not just money, but how we use all of that God's entrusted to us, is really going to be a major part of how He determines what to do with us once we're in this kingdom. And I'm sure you're familiar with this passage. I don't think we have to read it all. But here in Matthew 25, verses 31 to 46, it's Jesus telling of when the King comes, the Son of Man comes, He sits on His throne, He judges between the peoples of earth, and He separates them between the righteous and the unrighteous. And He says it's like a shepherd separating sheep and goats. Do you remember the basis of His decision of who is righteous? Do you remember what He based that evaluation on? And it's found in verse 34 and following. What was His evaluation of their righteousness?
Taking care of others.
Yeah. Now, the way He puts it first is, you took care of me, right, and all these different needs I had. And I love the response of the righteous ones. They're like, wait, what? When did we do that? I don't remember seeing you. And his answer, of course, is hugely significant. In verse 40, whatever you did for the least of one of the least of these brothers of mine, sisters of mine, you did it for me. By the way, He's talking about His disciples here. We're to take care of anyone in need we can, but here specifically, He's referring to your righteousness is displayed on how you took care of His people. Because how you deal with His people is a reflection of how you view Him, right? So notice what He says here. To those people, in verse 34, come you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, there it is, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. Now, what He's basically saying to these people is, you took your resources that I entrusted to you, and you took care of my thing, my people. Your priorities were my priorities. You saw as important what I saw as important, taking care of my people. And He takes it very personally, as you would expect. That's why He puts it in the I. And again, I love their surprise. What? When did we take care of you? Well, you took care of me when you took care of my people, because they're me. They're my body. They're my bride. They're a part of me. Now, of course, you know the flip side of this. When He consigns the unrighteous to the curse, the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels in verse 41, He goes on to say how they neglected to take care of His people. Or Him. And they're like, when did we not take care of you? And He said, you didn't take care of the least of my brothers. So, the reason I bring this up is this is a clear picture that we're not talking about nebulous, non-real thing. What Jesus is referring to when He says building His kingdom, there's real things He's talking about. Taking care of His people in need, spreading the gospel, making His kingdom, or helping, working with Him to advance His kingdom. To be careful how I word that, because we don't personally advance the kingdom by ourselves. But it's how we're using all that's been given to us for our Master's purposes. Now, I'm guessing each one of us has a certain conviction from the Spirit when we talk like this in certain areas of our lives. I'm guessing. Unless you've matured to that level, which is possible, but for most of us, we're still maturing. We're still growing. I know Christine and I still are as a couple and as parents and as disciples. But this is the perspective I wanted to end our study on, because I really do long for each of you to have the fullest honor you could have in the new world. Of course, I want you to be there, and I fully expect you will be. You love Jesus, but there's more to it than that. And that's, I guess, the point I wanted to drive home at the end here. There's more than just making it in.